There's a certain kind of silence that grows in a mother's heart, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, exhausted kind. It's the silence that comes after years of giving without being thanked, of helping without being seen, of loving without being loved back in the same way. That silence had become the soundtrack of Renate's life. She was 71, a widow, living alone in a house that still smelled faintly of her husband's cologne. The walls carried echoes of a family she had once believed would always surround her, laughter from birthdays, old photos of Christmas mornings, the marks on the kitchen wall where she measured her son's height every year until he grew taller than her. Now, those walls only heard her footsteps. But Renate didn't complain. She believed that a mother's duty was to give, to sacrifice, to make life easier for the ones she loved. And in her mind, that duty never expired, not even when her son Max became a grown man with a wife and a home of his own. Every month, without fail, Renate went to the bank and transferred $500 to cover Max and Lena's rent. She never forgot a single payment. She treated that transaction like paying for her own electricity bill, necessary, unquestioned, routine. When Lena said the couch was too old, Renate bought them a new one. When their refrigerator broke down, she ordered one online and had it delivered. When Max's car needed repairs, she covered the cost, saying, "It's better to keep you safe than worry about the money." She thought she was helping them build their future, but in truth, she was slowly dismantling her own. The line between love and servitude can be thin, and for many mothers, invisible. Renate never saw herself as generous. She saw herself as responsible. That's what many parents do. They disguise obligation as love, because the thought of being useless is unbearable. In family psychology, this is known as emotional overcompensation, when a parent tries to fix every problem, not just out of kindness, but out of fear that their worth will vanish if they stop giving. Renate didn't know that term, but she knew the feeling. When she gave, she felt needed. When she said no, she felt guilty. And guilt, for her, was more painful than loneliness. Renate's love was quiet, invisible, the kind that doesn't post photos, doesn't demand praise. She remembered the details no one else noticed. She remembered Max's favorite soup when he caught the flu as a child. She remembered how he used to hug her tightly before leaving for school. She remembered his wedding dreams, the way he once said, "Mom, when I get married, you'll be my first dance." She carried those promises like sacred treasures. So when Lena entered his life, vibrant, modern, confident, Renate welcomed her with open arms. She bought her gifts on birthdays, helped plan their engagement party, even called her my second daughter. In her heart, she truly believed she was building a new, loving family circle. But in Lena's world, Renate wasn't part of the circle. She was orbiting around it. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. First, it was Lena's tone, polite, but slightly condescending. Then, it was the way Max started making decisions without consulting her. Then, it was how they'd forget to visit on weekends, cancel dinners, or send short transactional messages like, "Hi Mom, can you help us this month?" Love was slowly being replaced by invoices. Renate noticed it but refused to believe it. She told herself they were just busy, stressed, newly married, building a life. That's how manipulation often works. It hides behind logic until your heart accepts cruelty as normal. If you've ever met someone like Renate, you'll understand she didn't help because she was naive. She helped because she was conditioned to believe that a good mother never stops helping. It's a mindset passed down through generations. If I have something, my children will never go without. But no one tells mothers that when they give too much, they accidentally teach their children how to take without gratitude. Renate's fear wasn't of losing money, it was of losing purpose. And Lena, who had learned quickly how to charm her, knew exactly which buttons to press. "You're like a second mom to me," Lena would say, right before asking for something expensive. "You're so generous, Renate. I don't know what we'd do without you." It wasn't flattery. It was training. Renate didn't realize how alone she was until one Sunday morning. She had cooked a big lunch, roast chicken, potatoes, salad, expecting Max and Lena to visit. She had texted them earlier in the week, "Lunch at 1?" No reply. By 2:30, the food was cold. By 4, she wrapped everything in foil and placed it in the freezer. That's when she saw the photo on her phone. Lena had posted a story of them having brunch at a fancy restaurant. The caption read, "Family time." No tag, no mention, not even a text to cancel. Renate sat down and stared at the screen for a long time. In that moment, She wasn't angry, just empty. That's what emotional neglect feels like. Not pain, but absence. As storytellers and analysts of human relationships, we often see this tragic cycle. A parent gives endlessly to stay connected. The child adapts, seeing giving as the parent's role. Boundaries blur, and love becomes conditional based on financial support. When the parent stops giving, the child calls it betrayal. Renate's story isn't unique, it's universal. Millions of parents fall into this quiet trap. They exchange independence for belonging, hoping money will buy closeness. But love bought with guilt never lasts. Every gift Renate gave was a message. Please don't forget me. Every payment she made was a plea. Please still need me. But the more she gave, the more invisible she became. Love, when unreciprocated, turns into a mirror. It reflects everything you give, but nothing you receive. And one day, when you finally look closely, you don't recognize yourself anymore. Renate was about to reach that point. The signs were all there, the sudden coldness, the financial dependence, the lack of gratitude, but she still believed they loved her. She still imagined walking her son down the aisle, being hugged in wedding photos, crying tears of joy instead of betrayal. She couldn't yet imagine the words that would shatter her illusions forever. Because soon, when she would ask about the wedding the day she'd dreamed of for years, her daughter-in-law would look her straight in the eye and say, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." That moment would change everything. It was supposed to be a simple phone call. Renate dialed her son's number with a smile, her heart fluttering the way it always did before big family moments. She wanted to ask something joyful, something ordinary. "When is the wedding, sweetheart? Should I book the hair appointment?" That small, innocent question became the knife that cut her world in two. When her daughter-in-law Lena answered, her tone carried that sugary politeness Renate knew too well. "Oh, we already got married yesterday," she said, pausing for effect. "We only invited special people." Renate froze. She blinked once, twice, thinking maybe she misheard. Special people. The words echoed in her ears, sharp and cold, slicing through every memory she had of kindness, every moment she thought they were family. Her hand trembled so violently that the phone almost slipped from her grasp. The living room, once filled with warmth, suddenly felt like a stranger's house. And across from her, Lena, the same young woman Renate had once called "my second daughter," now wore a smile that was almost cruel. It wasn't the smile of a bride in love. It was the smile of victory. On the back of her bedroom door hung a pale pink dress, the one Renate had chosen for the wedding. She had tried it on 3 times, making sure it matched her beige heels. She'd even bought a delicate pearl necklace to complete the look. She had imagined the photos, her standing proudly next to her son, her eyes full of tears and love. That dress, now, was a monument to delusion. She opened the closet door, stared at it, and whispered, "So that's what I am. Not special." The dress suddenly felt heavy, obscene, like a lie she had told herself. When betrayal happens, it doesn't come alone. It drags every unspoken hurt with it. Renate's mind flooded with images. The time she paid their rent even when her own heating broke down. The $800 she gave Lena for personal expenses that had quietly become a wedding dress. The months she had skipped her own dental appointments to save for their honeymoon gift. And now, she realized, she had financed a celebration she wasn't even invited to. The insult wasn't just exclusion, it was erasure. They had erased her from the story she helped create. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "You already got married?" Max appeared behind Lena, avoiding his mother's gaze. "Mom, it was very small. Just the 2 of us and a few witnesses. You know how we hate big crowds." She wanted to believe him. Oh, how desperately she wanted to believe him. But the truth was only 1 click away. Later that night, when she scrolled through social media, she saw the photos. The champagne, the white dress, the flower arch, Lena's parents smiling, her siblings raising glasses, everyone glowing under golden lights. Everyone except her. Her son hadn't looked at her that way in years, she realized. That open, grateful smile he once saved for his mother now belonged to someone else entirely. Renate sat on her bed, staring at the phone. For years, she had believed love was measured by sacrifice. But in this moment, she saw what her sacrifices had bought her. Silence, distance, invisibility. She didn't cry, not yet. Shock always comes before the tears. When your heart breaks slowly over years, the final shatter doesn't sound like thunder. It sounds like nothing. It's a quiet click, the sound of hope locking itself away. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself at the dining table surrounded by bills, receipts, and bank statements. She started writing down numbers. Rent, 536, ashtuoniolika, nulis at. Food, groceries, 236, septyni 200. Gifts, emergencies, and repairs equals $8,200. Total, $33,400. She stared at the number in disbelief. $33,400, the price of being a special person. That's when the tears came, slow and burning. She cried not for the money, but for the illusion, for every time she mistook exploitation for affection. From a storyteller's and analyst's perspective, this moment represents the awakening phase of betrayal trauma, the point where denial dies and reality begins. It's the most painful stage, because you finally see the pattern you've been living in, and you can't unsee it anymore. For years, Renate had believed she was the glue holding her family together. Now she realized she was just the wallet holding it up. And once the money stopped flowing, so would the affection. A week later, Lena called again. Her voice was trembling. "Renate, the rent is overdue. The landlord says he'll evict us if you don't transfer it today." For years, that tone had been enough to send Renate running to the bank. But this time, something in her had changed. She took a deep breath and said calmly, "Didn't I tell you I only help special people?" There was a long silence on the line. Renate could almost hear Lena's confusion turning into panic. "Renate, what do you mean? We're special to you, aren't we? You're like a second mother to me." That sentence, "you're like a second mother to me," was the final insult. Because real daughters don't need to remind you they love you. Renate smiled, not kindly, but firmly. "Lena, you taught me something important. You taught me what special really means, and I'm finally learning to be special to myself." Then she hung up. It was the first boundary she had drawn in decades. She didn't expect applause. She didn't post a triumphant quote online. She simply sat there, drinking her coffee, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat, steady, calm, alive. In that quiet morning light, she realized something profound. Freedom doesn't always start with revenge. Sometimes it starts with silence. No screaming, no justifying, no explanations, just a single, powerful no. And that no was the first real act of self-love she had ever performed. To anyone listening or watching this story right now, maybe you've lived your own version of it. Maybe you've given endlessly to people who only remembered you when they needed something. Maybe your love has been mistaken for weakness. Let Renate's story remind you, you are not selfish for setting limits. You are not cruel for refusing manipulation. You are not crazy for expecting respect. Sometimes, the people closest to you will only see your worth when you stop giving it away for free. That day, when Renate hung up on Lena, she wasn't just ending a call, she was ending a cycle. And she didn't know it yet, but the next chapter of her life would be a battle, not for money, but for dignity. The morning after she hung up the phone, Renate woke to a stillness she hadn't felt in years. No messages, no calls, no obligations waiting like unpaid debts. The first thing she noticed wasn't peace, it was fear. Because when you've lived your whole life serving others, freedom feels like falling. She sat at the edge of her bed, sunlight touching her wrinkled hands, and realized that for the first time in decades, she didn't have to explain herself to anyone. No rent to pay for someone else. No fake emergencies to fix. Just herself, a woman she had long forgotten. In the bathroom, the mirror reflected a face she barely recognized. Same lines, same silver hair, same gentle eyes, but the expression was new. Calm, sharp, a little defiant. She leaned closer. "So this is what clarity looks like," she whispered. The world had called her generous. But generosity without respect isn't kindness, it's surrender. And she was done surrendering. That realization was the quiet beginning of her awakening, the moment when survival turns into self-recognition. Renate brewed coffee and sat at the same dining table where she had planned birthday surprises, wrapped gifts, and signed transfers for Max and Lena's bills. But that morning, the table became her battlefield. She pulled out her checkbook, bank statements, and a calculator. Line by line, she started listing every payment: rent, groceries, car repairs, gifts, doctor bills, Lena's emergencies. 3,400美元. She circled the number. It wasn't just a figure, it was the sum of her silence. Every dollar was a piece of her self-worth she had traded away for crumbs of affection. She took a deep breath and said out loud, "Enough." Not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly, like someone finally closing a door that should have been shut years ago. At noon, Renate put on her beige coat, grabbed her purse, and walked to the bank, the same branch where she'd stood dozens of times, sending money she could barely afford to give. The teller, Mr. Klein, greeted her with his usual kind smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Richter. Same transfer as always?" She paused, then smiled. "Not today. I'm here to cancel all automatic payments, and I want to secure my accounts." Mr. Klein blinked. "All of them?" "All," she said. "Every last one." He hesitated, sensing the weight behind her words. "Are you sure? Did something happen?" Renate looked him in the eye. "What happened is that I finally opened mine." As he processed the request, she felt something lift off her shoulders, the invisible weight of a lifetime of yes. When he handed her the confirmation papers, he said quietly, "Mrs. Richter, I've seen you be very generous over the years. I hope no one pressured you." She smiled, genuinely this time. "No, Mr. Klein. For once, I'm the one pressuring myself to live." When she stepped out of the bank, the sky looked bluer than it had in months. Her phone began ringing before she even reached the corner. First Max, then Lena, then Max again. Normally, she would have answered on the first ring, her heart pounding with the old mix of anxiety and hope. This time, she let it ring. 3 calls. 4. Then silence. 10 minutes later, another call. Then a message. "Mom, please answer, we need to talk." She deleted it without reading further, and for the first time in her life, she felt powerful doing nothing. Because silence, she realized, is also a language the one manipulators fear the most. That afternoon, Renate went for a walk. No errands, no bank visits, no supermarket runs for someone else's groceries. Just a walk. For herself. She passed the park where she used to push Max on the swings, the bakery where she used to buy him treats, the church where she had prayed for his happiness. Now those places held different meanings. She didn't walk as a mother seeking approval. She walked as a woman reclaiming herself. At one point, she stopped by the window of a travel agency and stared at a poster. "Rediscover yourself, Paris, in springtime." She smiled. Maybe one day. When she reached her house, 3 cars were parked in front, Max's, Lena's, and one she didn't recognize. She froze. Through the window, she saw movement inside, papers on the dining table. Her papers. Her stomach turned cold. They had keys. Of course she had given them years ago. Trust had been her biggest weakness. Renate took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The moment she entered, all conversations stopped. Max sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. Lena paced, restless, and a man in a gray suit stood at her dining table, flipping through her documents. "What is happening here?" she demanded. They all turned as if she were the intruder. Lena spoke first, her voice sugar-sweet but trembling. "Renate, thank God you're here. We need to talk. This is Mr. Fisher, a family attorney. We're worried about you." Renate's voice came out calm, steady. "Worried about me? You're in my house, touching my papers without permission." Max finally looked up, his tone rehearsed. "Mom, we're just trying to help. You've been acting strange, cutting us off, ignoring calls. We think you might need professional help." Renate's eyes flicked to the lawyer, who smiled politely, hands folded over her private bank statements. "Mrs. Richter," he said, "I'm here to assess your mental and financial capacity. Your children are concerned about your well-being." That was the exact moment something inside her snapped, not in weakness, but in power. For years, she had swallowed her anger. Now, her silence had a backbone. She walked straight to the table, gathered her documents, and said, "These are private. You have no right to look at them." The lawyer hesitated. Lena tried to take her hand. "Renate, honey, we're just worried. At your age, confusion can happen." "Confusion?" Renate interrupted. Her voice wasn't trembling anymore. "I'm not confused, Lena. I'm clear. Clearer than I've ever been. And right now, I see 3 people in my house who need to leave." Mr. Fisher tried one last time, opening a folder. "It's just a power of attorney. It would let Max and Lena manage your finances temporarily." Renate took the folder, walked to the trash bin, and dropped it in. "The only transition happening here is yours to the front door." Lena's expression twisted from pity to fury. "You can't do this to us, Renate. We made plans based on your support. We have bills, obligations." "Obligations based on my money," Renate said evenly. "Not my happiness. Not my peace. Just my bank account." "Well, the account is closed and so is your access to me." Max stood up, his face red with anger. "You'll regret this. You'll end up alone." Renata looked straight at him. "I already am. But this time it's by choice, not by your neglect." When the door closed behind them, Renate stood in her living room surrounded by silence. But it was no longer the silence of invisibility. It was the silence of freedom. Her hands were shaking, but her heart was steady. She knew this wasn't the end of the conflict. They'd come back maybe with lawyers, maybe with lies. But something irreversible had happened. She had switched roles. From victim to witness. From caretaker to protector. From invisible mother to visible woman. And that's the moment every betrayed heart eventually reaches, when the fear of losing others becomes smaller than the fear of losing yourself. Renate had finally chosen herself. There's a special kind of betrayal that doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It comes in envelopes, thick, stamped, official-looking. Renate found one on her doorstep 3 weeks after she threw Max, Lena, and the lawyer out of her house. The return address, Family Court of Munich. She opened it with trembling hands, her stomach turning cold before her eyes could even read the words. It was a petition for guardianship. Her own son and daughter-in-law were trying to have her declared mentally incompetent. The document stated that Max Richter and his wife Lena expressed concern for the well-being of the respondent, who appears to suffer from cognitive decline and irrational financial behavior. Her crime? Canceling their automatic transfers, installing locks and security cameras, refusing to sign the power of attorney. According to them, those were signs of paranoia and mental confusion. Renate sat down slowly, clutching the paper. So this was their new tactic. If they couldn't control her with guilt, they would try to control her with law. The following days were a blur. Phone calls from unknown numbers. Letters. Concerns from neighbors Max had clearly manipulated into believing she was forgetful. Even the pharmacist, Mr. Green, asked gently one day, "Mrs. Richter, are you all right? Your son said you've been having memory trouble." Her throat went dry. The shame burned hotter than the anger. Because this is what psychological abuse looks like when it hides behind family ties. They weren't just trying to steal her money, they were trying to steal her credibility. One evening, as she sat in her quiet house surrounded by paperwork and fear, the phone rang again. It was Eleanor, her neighbor and friend, the one who had once been through something similar. Eleanor listened silently as Renate read the court papers aloud. When she finished, her friend's voice was firm. "Then you fight. You don't let them write your ending for you." The next morning, Renate called Mr. Weber, an elder law attorney who specialized in financial abuse. He listened patiently as she told her story from the beginning, every payment, every manipulation, every humiliation. When she finished, he leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Richter, this is not confusion, this is clarity, and clarity is exactly what we'll prove." The first step was to document everything. Mr. Weber asked her to gather all bank statements showing the money she had given Max and Lena, copies of texts and messages asking for financial help, photos and proof of the wedding she wasn't invited to, witness statements from people who saw her, daily neighbors, shopkeepers, doctors. Renate spent days compiling everything. Each receipt felt like a piece of her dignity she was reclaiming. She visited Dr. Moore, a cognitive specialist who tested her memory, logic, and reasoning. The results were clear. Cognitive function, excellent. Mental state, stable. Judgment, sound. She wasn't losing her mind, she was just losing her patience. Before the trial, Max and Lena tried one last time to break her. They showed up at her door with fake warmth and trembling voices. "Mom, this has gone too far. We never wanted to hurt you," Max said, tears glistening perfectly on cue. "We just want what's best for you," Lena added softly. Renate looked at them not with hate, but with heartbreaking clarity. "You want what's best for you, not for me." Lena tried to take her hand. "Don't you want your family back?" Renate smiled sadly. "My family left me the day you called me crazy." She closed the door. This time, she didn't cry. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm, gray sky, cold wind, and tension that tasted like metal. Inside the courtroom, Max and Lena sat on one side, whispering with their lawyer. Renate sat on the other, calm but resolute, with Mr. Weber beside her. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, began the proceedings. Mr. Fisher, their lawyer, stood first. "Your Honor, my clients are deeply concerned. Mrs. Richter's behavior has become erratic. She's isolating herself, cutting off her family, and making impulsive financial decisions." Mr. Weber rose slowly. "Your Honor, my client isn't erratic. She's independent. And independence, last I checked, isn't a symptom of insanity." A quiet chuckle rippled through the courtroom. Mr. Fisher began cross-examining Renate, his tone polite but loaded. "Mrs. Richter, is it true you recently changed all your locks?" "Yes." "And installed security cameras?" "Yes." "Why, if you trust your family?" Renata looked straight at him. "Because I learned I shouldn't." The lawyer paused. She didn't look fragile, she looked formidable. Then came the questions about money. "You've given your son over $30,000 in 3 years. Why?" "Because I thought love meant sacrifice." "And why did you stop?" "Because I realized sacrifice without respect is slavery." Even the judge's expression softened. One by one, people took the stand. Mr. Green, the pharmacist, admitted that Max had pressured him into signing a false statement. Eleanor described Renate as sharp, social, and in better shape than most people half her age. Dr. Moore presented her medical evaluation, calling her lucid and mentally strong. By the time the defense rested, it was clear who the confused ones really were. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read her ruling. The court finds that Mrs. Renate Richter is of sound mind and full mental competence. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, evidence suggests that financial and emotional exploitation was attempted by the petitioners under the guise of care. She turned to Max and Lena. "Family is a bond, not a bank account. This case is a disgrace to both." The gavel struck. Case closed. Outside the courthouse, the sky had cleared. Eleanor hugged her tightly. Mr. Weber smiled and said, "You didn't just win a case, Mrs. Richter. You set a precedent." Renate looked at the papers in her hand, the official declaration of her freedom. It wasn't joy she felt. It was peace, deep, quiet peace. She thought of all the mothers who were still trapped in similar situations, afraid to say no, afraid to lose love. And she whispered softly, "I hope they hear me now." Because sometimes the strongest act of love isn't forgiveness. It's resistance. In life and relationships, betrayal often hides behind words like care and family. But love that demands your silence is not love, it's control. And when greed wears the face of affection, it takes enormous courage to see the truth. Renate learned that boundaries don't destroy families, manipulation does. Her victory wasn't revenge, it was recovery. For the first time in years, she walked home alone, not lonely, but liberated. The gavel's echo had long faded, but its vibrations still lived in Renate's chest. For the first time in years, she walked out of a courthouse not as a defendant, not as a mother desperate for validation, but as a woman who had reclaimed her name. Outside, the sky had opened into pale gold. The air tasted new, sharp, honest, cleansing. She wasn't angry anymore. She was free. The next morning, sunlight streamed into her kitchen, painting soft lines across the table where she used to sign bank transfers for Max and Lena. Now, the table was empty except for a cup of coffee and a small vase of daisies, the simplest, purest flowers she could find. She didn't need roses anymore. She didn't need extravagance or performance. Freedom had a quieter beauty. She opened her mail without fear. No lawyers, no demands, no false apologies. Only a letter from Eleanor, written in careful cursive. "You did it, my dear. You found yourself again. Now promise me, live for you." Renate smiled. It's strange how silence can change shape. Once, it was loneliness heavy, suffocating, filled with questions. Now, it was peace. There were no calls demanding money, no texts pretending to be love. She had thought that cutting them off would break her. Instead, it rebuilt her, because the absence of noise is where truth grows. Healing, Renate discovered, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in moments so small you almost miss them. The first morning you wake up and don't reach for your phone. The first time you buy something just for yourself, a new sketchbook, a scarf, a book of poetry. The first laugh that doesn't hide behind guilt. She started walking to the market every Saturday again, carrying her old woven basket. The vendors still recognized her. "Mrs. Richter, long time no see." She smiled and said, "I was busy learning to rest." It wasn't a lie. Renate decided to sell her house. Not out of spite, but out of closure. That house had been both her fortress and her prison. Every room held ghosts. The chair where she cried after the wedding, the table where they accused her of madness. So, she let it go. She donated half of the sale to a nonprofit that protects elderly people from financial abuse. The other half, she kept not for someone else's dream, but for her own. She rented a small apartment near a park, bright, quiet, easy to keep clean. Her balcony overlooked a line of trees that blazed orange in autumn. And for the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt light. Renate began painting again. At first, she was hesitant, her hand shaking slightly as she held the brush. But the colors guided her. Soft blues, earthy browns, warm golds. What started as a hobby soon became therapy. Each brushstroke said what words couldn't. I'm here. I survived. I still believe in beauty. Sometimes she painted flowers, sometimes she painted oceans. But every canvas, no matter the subject, carried the same quiet message: freedom. Art had once been her husband Robert's dream for her. Now it was her own. One crisp afternoon, she visited Robert's grave, something she hadn't done since the lawsuit began. She brought lilies, his favorite. Kneeling by the headstone, she whispered, "I think I finally understand what you meant when you said, 'Take care of yourself.' You didn't mean financially. You meant emotionally. I'm doing that now." The wind moved gently through the leaves, almost like an answer. For years, she had lived as if her heart belonged to others. Now, she was learning it belonged to her first. Eleanor introduced her to a small group of women at the local cafe: widows, retirees, mothers estranged from children who had grown too entitled to care. They called themselves the Second Bloomers. Every Thursday, they met for coffee, laughter, and stories. They weren't bitter. They were awake. They talked about rediscovery, learning new recipes, dating again, traveling alone, taking painting classes. Eleanor would often say, "We gave the first half of our lives to others. The second half belongs to us." And each week, Renate believed it more. Renate's transformation wasn't luck. It was what psychologists call post-betrayal growth, the ability to rebuild meaning after being deeply wronged. She had gone through all 5 stages: shock, the betrayal; denial, trying to rationalize; anger, setting boundaries; action, fighting for herself; renewal, choosing peace. Most people stop at anger. But Renate turned anger into clarity and clarity into compassion. She didn't want revenge. She wanted restoration of herself. One night, she sat at her desk and wrote a letter to Max. She didn't plan to send it. "Dear Max, I hope you are well. I truly do. I've forgiven you not because you asked, but because I refused to carry your burden any longer. You taught me something painful but necessary, that love without respect is not love at all. I no longer need you to see my worth. I see it now. I wish you peace, but from afar. Mom." She folded the letter, placed it in her journal, and closed it softly. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't reconciliation. It was release. Months later, on a warm evening, Renate sat on her balcony, painting the sunset. The light shifted from gold to pink to violet colors that once reminded her of endings but now spoke of beginnings. Below her, laughter rose from the cafe where her friends were meeting. A gentle breeze brushed her face. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm still here, and that's enough." In that moment, she didn't need anyone to tell her she was special. She knew it. Renate's story isn't just hers. It belongs to every person who's ever confused giving with belonging, every parent who loved too much, every soul who stayed silent to keep peace. Her journey teaches this. True love doesn't need repayment. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose who to let in through. And sometimes, saying no is the kindest thing you can do for your future self. In a world that praises sacrifice, Renate's courage reminds us that self-respect is sacred. Because love that costs your dignity isn't love, it's debt. And peace that demands silence isn't peace, it's prison. So if you're listening to this story right now, ask yourself, are you giving from love or from fear of losing love? Are you helping? Or are you being drained? Do the people you care for see your heart or just your wallet? Renate's answer came too late to save the past, but right on time to save herself. And maybe that's the real moral here. It's never too late to choose yourself. Never too late to start again. Never too late to be free.